Morning. My name is Susan Key, and I want to introduce to you Sandy Carroll, who is with us today as a special guest. She is the daughter of Colonel Royal Thompson, who was responsible for dropping the Treadway Bridge at Chosin Reservoir. Many of you may have seen stories about a lot of the battles of Chosin Reservoir, where the Marines were fighting on the western side of the Chosin, and the 7th Infantry of the U.S. Army was on the east. And as they were trying to break out of the Chosin, the Chinese bombed out a very critical pass, the only way out of the Chosin Reservoir at Funchilin Pass. And on December 7th, 1950, a mission was accomplished where Sandy's father led a squadron of cargo planes that dropped the Treadway Bridge. So, without me going into too much detail, I am just so excited to have Sandy share with us all that she has learned and researched about her father's story. So, Sandy, welcome and thank you for sharing your father's story with us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Susan. As you know, I gave this presentation at the Chosen Few reunion in October of 2025, and I'm really happy to be given the opportunity to kind of reprise that presentation so that maybe a wider audience, including hopefully other Chosen Few veterans that weren't able to come to the meeting, can hear the story.
That's exactly right. And Sandy's going right to the most important part of this is that we want this story to be known because so many people don't know who it was that was behind the planning and the execution of this incredible plan to drop the Treadway Bridge to get the Marines out of the Chosin Reservoir. And I recommended Sandy to speak at the Chosin Few reunion in October of this year. And both Sandy and I really desired to share this story with a wider audience. That would be any veterans who couldn't come to that reunion and anyone who's interested in learning more about what happened during this epic breakout of Chosin. So I'd like to also start out by really recognizing the U.S. Air Force role at Chosin. And I think often we hear stories about Marines and Army soldiers fighting on the ground, and that is absolutely worthy of learning and sharing their stories. But I think often the role of the U.S. Air Force in dropping critical supplies and also evacuating the wounded out, and in this case, dropping a critical bridge to for them to break out, is often kind of a backstory that most people don't think about. So I am so happy that Sandy will share with us and bring to the forefront the role of the U.S. Air Force at this Battle of Chosin. And I know Sandy will talk a lot more than just about the Chosin because her father was involved in many events prior to Chosin. With critical things happening in the Korean War as well as in World War II. So, with that, I will let Sandy take the floor and share how it is that she was able to research and put together all this information of her father's story. So Sandy's going to share with us here a presentation that she made at the Chosen Few reunion in October of this year.
So I introduced myself as letting them all know that I'm not a historian and I'm not a Korean War expert, and for sure I'm not a public speaker, but I am a daughter, and a daughter who feels a kinship to those that fought at the Battle of Chosin because my dad and they occupied the same space and time back in 1950. So my presentation today is about how I figured out what my dad did in the Korean War. Now, I know that you chosen veterans that were there. They know everything there is to know probably about the ground war, but a lot of people, as Susan said, don't know too much about the air war. And so I hope also in my presentation you'll learn some things about the air war that you weren't aware of. So when I first became interested in my dad's military career, I started first to ask about his World War II experiences. But unfortunately, he died at quite a young age of 68, and that was long before I became curious about what he did in the Korean War. So I had very little information, particularly firsthand information about what he did. And so this is the story of how I slowly uncovered what he did in the Korean War and then came to recognize its impacts. So this is my dad, by way of introduction, Colonel Royal S. Thompson. S stands for Seville. So when you look that up on Google, you don't find too many Royal Seville's Thompsons out there. He was born in rural Wisconsin. He graduated from the University of Wisconsin, and then he was accepted into the Air Corps Flying School and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Army Air Corps in 1941. So he was born in 1917 and passed away in 1986. Now, this at the time that he, was first flying in the military, it was about 8 months before Pearl Harbor. So, Dad's first assignment was to the 12th Bomb Squadron, which was really called in the Caribbean Air Force. So, he was down in Puerto Rico and the islands down in the Caribbean, St. Croix, Aruba, from 1941 until 1943. He was flying a B-18 bomber, which these bombers, there weren't too many of them made. They're kind of awkward looking, I think. They were shortly to be replaced by the B-17 bomber. Now, as a cheeky teen, I can remember asking my dad, why in the world were you lounging on a Caribbean island when there was a world war going on? And he told me that at the time, all the sea shipping, or much of the sea shipping from the United States over to Europe, was going south through the Caribbean Ocean and then over to Africa and then north to Europe. And this was to avoid, the German Navy. And so they were providing convoy escort duties. And there's even an account of one B-18 sinking a German sub. Now, during this time, this was 41 to 43 again, my dad was promoted to captain and he became the head of that bomb squadron. But in August of 1943, he was sent to Sedalia Army Airfield, which is now Whiteman Air Force Base, and that's in Missouri, as there was a, C-47 troop carrier group being formed there. So this is the 442nd Troop Carrier Group formation in August of 1943. And this picture here, this is my dad sitting down with his elbows on his knees. The 442nd Troop Carrier Group had 4 squadrons, the 303rd through the 306th. And my dad is assigned to command the 306 Troop Carrier Squadron. At the time, he was 25 years old. And when they went over to Europe, rotated to Europe, during that time in Europe, in England and France, the squadron grew to 350 to 400 men. And I just think, a 25 to 27-year-old having that much responsibility, it's hard for me to believe. So they were at Sedalia. And then they trained in a few other places. They had to learn how to pick up gliders, how to tow gliders, and how to drop paratroopers. And after the training, the group rotated to England. The air echelon flew south through the Caribbean again, down to actually South America, over to Ascension Island, and then to Africa and north to England. The rest of the squadron and troop carrier group got to go over on the Queen Mary. Now, Dad's 306 Troop Carrier Squadron participates in D-Day and subsequent airborne troop drops and many, many supply drops for the duration of World War II. Now, this is a plane. This is actually a painting of a plane. This was Dad's wingman. This painting was done by artist, well-known aviation artist named Ron Cole. Dad's wingman on D-Day night is what this shows. So these planes markings have also been used on a plane in the U.S. that is currently being used in World War II reenactments. There's quite a story behind this plane in Dad's World War II squadron and why this painting was created, but really that's a story for a different group of people. So what information did I have about Korea? Not much, I'll tell you that. I first became interested in the Korean War in the late 1990s, but I had really very little information. Now, this was about 12 years after my dad's passing. And to let you know, my mother and my dad didn't know each other at the beginning of the Korean War. And so firsthand information from my mother was limited. Plus, she had some memory issues as she aged, and I couldn't necessarily, count on what she remembered. But I did have this Legion of Merit certificate. What you see there is a picture of it after I framed it. When I got it, it was just in a manila envelope. But reading that certificate, it says that it's the Korean Theater of Operations from November 28th to December 10. Also, I had this red beret here. It's hard to see there, I'm sure, but this red beret, when my mother gave me the beret, she said that Dad had worn it for good luck on an important Korean War mission that he had volunteered for, and where he had dropped a bridge from his plane and saved thousands of lives. Now, I couldn't really count on that being the truth. So, that took a little more investigation. In 2000, the Air Force magazine did a very detailed chronology of the air war in Korea. And when I say detailed, it was 17 pages long, very little short, small typeset, would have a date, and then a sentence or two after the date. So it was quite detailed. So my mother gave me that magazine, and I scoured all those entries for something that said a bridge had been dropped from a plane, and I found an entry. And the date of that entry, December 7th, 1950. The entry said 8 C-119s dropped bridge spans to the surrounded U.S. troops so that they could cross a 1,500-foot gorge to break the enemy encirclement. This was the first air-dropped bridge in the history of warfare. So, wow, I found something that tracked with what my mother had said. And also now I knew that most likely my dad had flown this plane called a C-119, which is nicknamed a flying boxcar. And also, I had always assumed that if you drop a bridge from a plane, it's to ford a river. I had no idea that this bridge was that was over a chasm. So going backwards and forwards in that chronology, I found lots of other entries about C-119s, including their arrival in Japan in September of 1950, their participation in the two major paratroop drops in the Korean War, which took place in October of 1950 and March of 1951. Now, the October date, I noticed, coincided with my dad's Distinguished Flying Cross certificate. So with the information from the chronology, I contacted the Air Force magazine and asked them how I could get more information about that bridge drop mission. They sent me to the editor of that chronology article, and he was with the Air Force Historical Research Agency, which is located at Maxwell Air Force Base. I wrote them an email kind of telling them about the lore in my family and asking for details about that bridge drop mission. After some months, they sent me a couple of documents, including the pages from what I have on the screen there, the formerly classified December 1950 History of the 314th Troop Carrier Wing. The information they sent me confirmed that Dad was in the 314th Troop Carrier Wing, was based in Ashia, Japan, and was the commander of the bridge drop mission. So I had this photo among kind of my meager items from my dad's military career, but I had never known where this picture fit in. But now, from the information about the 314th Troop Carrier Squad or Troop Carrier Group, I could look up the squadrons that were associated with that group, and I found out that the 62nd Troop Carrier Squadron was part of the 314th. So suddenly, this photo fit in with my dad's Korea War story, and I knew it was taken in Ashia, Japan. I assume that these people that are in the photo with my dad, and he is right here, the fella standing closest to the sign there. I assume the others are members of the squadron, but frankly, there's nothing on the back of this photo, so I don't know anything about who else is in the photo. And can I stop right here and say that my dad was not very good about writing things on the back of photos. So I really have very little information. I have
Uh,
very few photos. Most
uh-huh.
of them are 8 by 10 glossies taken by the military, but he never wrote dates, locations, or names on the photos.
Well, you just
And
answered my question, Sandy. I was going to ask you if you happen to know the date, whether this was before, during, or after the war.
well, I mean, he would have been there. He was there from September of 50 until December of 52. So
Okay.
it would have been sometime in that time frame. But
Okay.
other
Well, that
than
gives
that,
us a pretty good idea.
yeah, other than that, I don't
Okay.
know.
Okay.
But the other thing about he didn't have too many photos like this, but he didn't put anything on the back. And also, I don't really have any photos of him that he took personally. I see other people that took photos of the airplanes they flew in, their friends, their co-pilots, what the plane looked like, the cockpit or something like that. But I really have no photos like that. And but I stop and think to myself, well, you don't have any photos of your own workplace either. But you know
That's
what?
a good
His
point.
workplace was a lot more interesting and a lot more adventuresome than my workplace was. So I wish I had a few more photos like that, but unfortunately I don't.
Well, actually, if I can interject a point there, I think that speaks to just how busy they were and how just it was constant. I'm sure you're going to be covering some of that of his schedule and what these missions were like. But I know a lot of the veterans I've interviewed, Korean War veterans, they don't have any pictures of the battlefield. They're busy
Really?
fighting.
Well,
And
certainly not the battlefield, no.
yeah, and not even on their way to the front lines, they don't have any pictures.
Right.
Only I think those veterans who served in more non-combat type of duties have pictures of civilians and Korean villages and things like that. But those that were right on the front, it's very hard to find any. So
Right.
yeah, I think
Well,
that's
Dad, Dad was lucky enough to be in Japan, and he did buy a camera there because
Mhm.
I own that camera, and I know he
Oh,
told me
wow.
he bought it in Japan. So
Great.
I think he could have taken more photos than he did.
Yeah, but I think this is a great picture though. I'm so glad you have this.
Yeah, I'm glad I figured out where that came from.
Hmm.
So the other squadrons in that 314th were the 50th, the 37th, and the 61st. And all of these squadrons operated out of Ashia, Japan for the duration of the war, mostly due to the fact that weren't airfields that were capable of landing these planes where the troops were. And this was an aerial resupply troop carrier group. So mostly they dropped from the air to resupply the men on the ground. So with this information, I now had things like the wing, the group, the squadron command, squadron number, the bridge drop mission, the C-119 flying boxcar. So I had lots of words to start searching on the internet. Plus, earlier in my search, the internet wasn't, as robust as it is now. So now in this picture, I am going to try to explain a little bit about the Chosin battle. The people that were there know all too well about this battle, but others that are listening might not know quite as well. And so I'm going to try to explain this a little bit. This map, by the way, comes from the Medal of Honor Museum, and it shows the 17 Medal of Honor recipients. So there were 17 men awarded the Medal of Honor for actions that took place in a 2-week battle. And I think that's a record. I don't think that record has been broken. Now, the battle involved the Marines, the Army, and the British Royal Marines. And I'm going to start right here on this small inset map just to show you that this is the Korean Peninsula. And here is the 38th parallel. So here is the Yalu River, which borders China and a little bit of the USSR over on this side. And so this little red square that you can see here is really this area blown up here. So what I'm showing here is that this was way north of the 38th parallel in North Korea, really closer to the Chinese border than it was to South Korea. And also, there's a key here on this map. It shows U.S. units, a blue man with a rifle, blue U.S. positions. There's a little line around the U.S. positions, which are kind of hard to see because the positions were pretty small. The dotted blue line is basically the main supply route, and that main supply route traveled from Hungnam down this way on the Sea of Japan all the way up this direction, and then it bifurcated. And then in the red, we have the Chinese. The Chinese were here, and these Chinese lines of attack. Okay, so I want to further orient you again. This is the main supply route. It was only one road that went up through these rather daunting mountains, and it went up to the toe of the Chosin Reservoir. So here's the Chosin Reservoir. And the road split there, and the Marines were sent up this direction to a village called Udam-ni up this way. And the army was sent this way, called east of Chosin. This town right here, called Hagaruri, that's where Colonel Oliver P. Smith had his advanced command post. And then further down south, we have the village of Koto-ri right here. Colonel Chesty Puller had a command post there. And then we have the Funchilin Pass in this area. And right between Koto-ri and the Funchilin Pass there's a bridge there that goes over some large metal pipes. They called them pinstocks. They were water-carrying pipes. And there was a concrete bridge that went over a chasm right in this area. It was about 3 or 4 miles south of Koto-ri. Okay, so as far as the words on the slide, this was like the coldest winter in the history of North Korea. And during this battle, it was always below zero and often up to 20 or even 30 degrees below zero for this whole 2-week period. The winds were sweeping down from Manchuria, so Manchuria is up this way. And North Korea, I think, has severe winters anyway, but the winds sweep down out of Manchuria. They bring snow and blizzards. And so for this 2-week period, essentially everything that our troops dealt with was frozen. The food was frozen, the water was frozen, the medicines were frozen, the ground was frozen. The rifles and the ammo didn't work quite as they normally would because of the cold temperatures where the ammo was stored. And of course, the men were frozen. There were many, many cases of severe frostbite. As far as troop strength, we had about 15,000, Allied type troops here in the Chosin Reservoir area, and an estimated 120,000 Chinese troops came down across the Yalu River into North Korea, and they distributed their troops, as you can see, around our troops. They kind of tended to stay up on the hillsides and the tops of the mountains. Our positions were closer to the road or closer down to the valley. Now, they had quietly moved in, traveling at night and then laying up in the daytime, laying up in caves, under trees, under ledges, in mines, in tunnels. And they would run the North Korean villagers out of their homes, and then use their homes to try to stay warm and steal all their food. So those North Koreans became refugees who then headed, south down toward Hungnam. Now, this battle started on the 27th of November, and it lasted through about December 10. And so that those first attacks were the night of the 27th, and the Chinese attacked in an odd way. They started their attacks with this very loud cacophony of noises that came from them, using bugles and whistles and cymbals and drums and shouting. I'm sure it was terrifying to hear all of this noise coming at you in the middle of the night. They poured down over our positions, and their attacks were relentless. Our guys would, shoot those in front of them. They would fall. There would just be another wave behind them. and they just kept coming and coming no matter how many they shot. That was because our troops were outnumbered in places as much as 10 to 1. Now, General Oliver P. Smith, who is the commanding general of these forces at Chosin, he didn't take him too long to recognize that we were surrounded, and he could see what we can easily see on this map. He could see also with his reports of troop movement and where his troops were, that the idea the Chinese had here was to surround us, cut off this route, this breakout route, by blowing up this bridge at this at these penstocks. And then, they intended to annihilate. That was their mission, to annihilate the 1st Marine Division and also the Army troops that were east of Chosin. So he knows that we need to move back down this one road, main supply route, down toward the sea. Now it's icy and it's snow covered. He orchestrates a fighting withdrawal. But as they reach down here, they get word that this bridge has been blown up.
And it was blown up by the Chinese.
Right. A couple of times.
Yes.
So here's a picture. This is a rather iconic photo of that blown up bridge. So the penstocks come out somewhere below here, I believe. And it was blown up 3 times, I think, and the Army rebuilt it twice. But at the time, at the time that we're talking about, it had been blown up for the 3rd time and obviously hasn't been repaired in this photo. But this is what they faced as they tried to come back down that main supply route. And the chasm under this bridge was reported to be 1,500 feet down. So the general in charge of the Army engineering proposed the treadway bridge drop to General Oliver P. Smith. Now, that was a Lieutenant Colonel Partridge, and he was a Marine engineer. And I don't think General Smith was too familiar with treadway bridges. And he questioned Lieutenant Colonel Partridge repeatedly about the plans and how this would work and what was the backup and so forth. And it's reported that Partridge got a little exasperated by all the questions from the general, and he finally said, "Look, I got you across the Han River. I got you an airfield at Hagaruri. I'll get you a darn bridge." And so
That's great.
General Smith agreed that, okay, that's what we would try to do, is put this bridge in. And here's another picture of the problem that was being caused. This is the backup of the men as they evacuated from Hagaruri, that village that was at the toe of the Chosin Reservoir, down toward Kodori. There were about 1,000 vehicles, and maybe, it's hard to say, 10,000 men that needed to go down this road. It was a one-way road. And they were kind of stalled or moving very slowly down this road. And they were stopped at Kodori while everybody was figuring out just exactly what to do about that bridge. Now, the Chinese were up on these hillsides and they were shooting down continuously at the men. We were losing men, daily. The Marine rifle companies were sent up to the tops of these ridges to push the Chinese back over the top of the ridges and to protect that road. And there was air power, mostly Navy and Marine fighter bombers that would provide close air support during this whole time if the weather allowed them to fly, which it didn't allow them to fly all the time. So the men here on this road would be going slowly or not at all, many of them having no idea why they weren't moving forward. I'm sure that was very frustrating.
Actually, that's a really good point, Sandy. There's many Chosin veterans I've interviewed, and many of them, while this was happening, while they were waiting for a solution to be given for this bombed out area, they were just stopped. And they told me they had no idea why they were stopped on their break out of the Chosin. And only after they returned home and started reading about what happened in that battle did they find out that, wow, actually, a bridge had to be dropped in to give them a passage out because they actually were trapped at the Chosin. So, yeah, many of these veterans, as you point out, while this was happening, had no idea what was up ahead and the great problem they had of trying to get across this bombed out pass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the fix here, the dropping of the treadway bridge spans. On December 5th, a lone C-119 flying boxcar made a practice bridge drop at Yanpo Airfield. Now, Yanpo is down close to the sea. It's near Hungnam, and it was a North Korean airfield that the Air Force took over. The practice drop was partially successful in that the pilot maintained the aircraft at the low altitude in which he had to fly, but it was unsuccessful in the fact that when that treadway bridge hit the ground, it ruined it. It was completely destroyed. Another practice drop was requested and desired by the Air Force, but there was just really no more time. And the commanders, the upper commanders said, no, we have to get this show on the road. In fact, I have read that between Koto-ri and Hagaru-ri, that stretch there of about 11 miles, in that time frame, as they were going back down that road, there were about over 600 casualties. So that was happening real time, and there really wasn't time for a second day to do another practice drop. So rigging specialists were flown in from Ashia because that's where the C-119s would all be loaded for all of their supply drops. They were loaded at Japan. And those people knew how to rig things and what size of parachutes to put on things. They were flown over from Ashia on December 6th. They worked all night to assess the problem, the weight and the shifting of the bridge spans and how to put them in the plane. They decided to rig two large parachutes, one on either end of these bridge spans. And they also had plywood support pieces that went down with each one of these spans. So all 8 spans were then dropped on December 7th at Koto-ri by 8 aircraft from the 314th Troop Carrier Group. One was damaged in the fall, but was still usable. One fell into the Chinese areas and wasn't recovered. So 7 spans and their plywood bridging pieces were available to be used at the Funchilin Pass, where the bridge was blown out, and 4 spans were actually used by the Army engineers. And this was credited as the first airdropped bridge in military history.
Hey, Sandy, can I ask you a quick question right here?
Sure.
Do you have any idea in your research how much each of the bridge spans weighed? You said there were 8 of them.
Yeah, with they were about 2,500 pounds, and then the plywood pieces were a little bit more. So under 5,000 pounds for the whole bundle, each of the bundles. So 8 drops of 5,000 pounds each. And 5,000 pounds wasn't an issue for a C-119. They could drop all sorts of things. They could drop about everything needed except a tank. So that the weight wasn't the issue. The issue was really flying at a low altitude when you drop that kind of weight out of the back of a plane suddenly.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we've seen pictures of paratroopers being dropped with jeeps and artillery guns and all kinds of stuff, but it's still hard to imagine that parachute could hold something so heavy. So
Yeah,
yeah, as you
it
mentioned, it
was
was about 5,000 pounds, but still, that wasn't that heavy compared to other things they have dropped before
right.
and in other missions. So that's a really good context to provide because yeah, we have no idea what these things involve in terms of weight and all the physics of having to be dropped
Yeah,
from a plane.
I actually have a manual about treadway bridges, and there's all sorts of information in there about how to
Yeah.
put them together and what kind of weights they would hold, and the more spans you put together, the less weight they hold, and that kind of thing. So I guess these engineers knew all of that information.
That's amazing that in such a short time, under such crunch and
Yes.
desperate times of trying to get these guys out with very little time, that they could have done something like that. So, yeah, thank you for giving us so much great information about just what was involved in just even rigging these pieces.
So in this picture, this is another iconic photo of the time. And here you see two spans put together, one side of the treadway bridge. And over here behind this Jeep would be the other side. And so they did have to, they had the bridging spans between them where the vehicles with less clearance would ride with one wheel on the treadway bridge and one wheel on the plywood bridging spans, but the bridging spans broke and they had to realign these treadway bridge metal spans sometime during this whole mission. And so they had to be very careful because, you know, the wheelbase of a Jeep and the wheelbase of a tank are quite different, and then all the other artillery pieces and so forth. But they were able to align these four spans such that every vehicle could pass over that. Every vehicle they had, 1,000 or so of them, could pass over that bridge. Some of them, though, only had a half an inch clearance on each side of their tire, and they would have somebody up front directing the traffic. And this went on day and night. So some of the men went over this bridge in the middle of the night, which would have been really scary to drive your vehicle up over that bridge with someone with a flashlight telling you to go a little bit left or a little bit right.
Wow, just really half an inch is all they had clearance.
Yep.
And of course, we can't forget the fact that it was snowing, it was freezing, it was probably icy. Even in just normal conditions, it would be hard, right, to maneuver this with only half-inch clearance. But yeah, with night and the cold winter weather, I cannot imagine. It was really a miracle, isn't it? That they were able to do this and get them through. It just really gives you an appreciation for what they accomplished.
It really does.
Yeah.
And, you know, I have wondered about this building up here, but I recently read an account that this building, it seems like, well, couldn't they just gone in the door and gone down through this building? But this account said that it was a building without a floor, this particular building here. So those metal pin stocks went through it. There was no floor there.
Oh, so it was just kind of a shell to cover the pipes.
Yeah, exactly.
I
So I have
did.
always kind
Yeah,
of wondered.
that's a great question, Sandy. I did wonder what was behind there.
Yeah, so now I
Yeah.
know.
Wow. Well, this is such great education for us, Sandy. I mean, you've just really done some great research on everything. Wow,
So
this is a great picture. Yeah, go
as
ahead.
far as the guys coming across the bridge, you know, it's really hard to tell when you start looking up numbers of the Chosin Reservoir battles, lots of numbers and lots of differences between numbers. But, you know, 15,000 or so were up in the Chosin Reservoir. Some of them were evacuated by air. Of course, some died. But I would say maybe 10,000 troops and their vehicles and the wounded and the dead, some of the dead that they were able to bring back, who they had strapped everywhere in some of the trucks, strapped to the roof and the hood of the Jeeps and so forth. They brought all these folks over this bridge and they made their way to Hungnam and to the sea and to evacuation. Now, this bridge was blown up by the last people to cross, so that it would be more difficult for the Chinese to just follow them down that road. And when everybody got to Hungnam, they were evacuated by the Navy. And also, about 90,000 North Korean refugees were evacuated as well. I'm sure I haven't read a book yet about that, but I'm going to. I'm sure that's quite an interesting story. The evacuation from Hungnam is called the Christmas Miracle.
Hmm.
It's considered the largest sea evacuation in our military history.
Well, and also, it is the greatest humanitarian action of the U.S. military in history because, as Sandy pointed out, 90,000 North Koreans had come behind these Marines as they were coming out of the Chosin in hopes to escape communism and to be taken to freedom in South Korea. So, yeah, the U.S. Navy made this incredible decision to evacuate all 90,000 of them who have now, with all their descendants, 75 years later, number more than 1 million of these Koreans who have been given freedom. So it is a really an epic story in itself. And that's for another another video or presentation, but certainly none of that could have happened without the bridge, right? So it's not only the 100,000 Marines and soldiers, but also the civilians
Right.
that escaped from Chosin. So this bridge was really an incredible life-saving rescue mission.
Right. Okay, so now that's my little lesson on the Battle of Chosin with some pictures and a little lesson about the treadway bridges. And so I'm going to get back to kind of my personal journey, trying to figure out what my dad did there. So in 2016, PBS and the American Experience produced this documentary. It's called The Battle of Chosin: Insurmountable Odds, Unforgiving Conditions, and Unyielding Courage. So, in my mind, no truer words were ever spoken about that battle. Now, I just happened to see this on my in my TV listings that night back in 2016 and decided to record it. I'm sure that most of the chosen veterans have seen this documentary, but if you're interested enough in this battle to be listening to this, then you probably should try to see this video. It's available from PBS as well as it might be in your library. It's in my small town library. But when you watch it, you need to be prepared for a very grim story.
Mhm.
Okay, so now we're going to try to play a little 2-minute film clip from this documentary that's just related to the bridge drop.
The request was urgent, came from General Smith himself. So the Air Force agreed to undertake an operation never before attempted.
We had to get that bridge in, and I had a brilliant staff, and they decided that we could airdrop different parts of a treadway bridge into the perimeter, bolt them together, and cantilever over the gap where the bridge had been blown up by the Chinese, and we'd be able to evacuate. Every steel girder required an entire plane to carry it. The C-119 Boxcar with two huge parachutes on both sides to drop it because they couldn't land.
Flying boxcars head for the area where the plight of the beleaguered troops has aroused the entire nation. Bridge sections to replace a crossing blasted by the Reds are parachuted to reopen the only escape route. This is the first time a bridge has ever been airdropped.
So when I was watching the documentary back after I'd recorded it, I got to the end of that 2-minute segment and I stopped the recording and I looked over at my husband and I said, "Did that look like my father to you?" And he said, "Yes, it really did look like your father." We played it back a couple of times, and this headshot here on the lower right-hand corner with him looking forward and talking into the radio, that was a clincher. That was my dad. And look what he had on his head. Now, it's not your military issue Air Force hat, but it is, in fact, this red beret that I showed you earlier that my mother had given me and told me the story of my dad. And then looking back a little further in the video, this was part of the clip also. This was my dad with that beret on. He was the commander of this eight airplane drop. And here he's talking to his crew before they jump into the plane and apparently take off. So, I was really beyond surprised to see this video clip in that documentary because I'd been looking at the internet quite a bit and I had never seen that film clip before. So, I had obviously never heard that, Dad never said anything about, well, he never said anything about dropping a bridge. He never said anything about a film crew in his plane or anything like that. So, it was really surprising to me. And, when you think back that I started on this journey with just this Legion of Merit certificate, given to him for this period of time, and to get to this, to see him in this documentary, that was pretty surprising, and, again, my mother telling me about this red beret and him wearing this on an important mission where he saved a lot of men's lives. So, I'd come a long way, I felt like, when I saw this.
What a shock. I mean, so when you saw that your father was in this documentary, all you know is that that's your father's face. At
Yeah.
this point, you haven't really learned anything about what this mission involved, right? And this is kind of
No,
what started everything for you, right?
no, I knew about the mission
Okay.
before this,
Okay.
but, I didn't have any affirmation other than words on paper,
I
right?
see. I
I
see.
didn't have any pictures. I didn't have any
Yeah.
film clips, but here's my dad on the radio in the airplane, where they're showing the Treadway Bridge Drop mission. So that was quite a cool moment for me.
Yeah. It is truly amazing to see in video of this as it was happening then. It is really incredible.
Yeah, I have no idea whether I said a film crew, but it could have been one guy with a camera.
Could
I'm
have
not
been,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. So now I found this article fairly recently, just this year, and it's about General Rowney, who was the Army engineer of 10 Corps. And I'm calling this slide, "He was in the room where it happened." So he states when he writes a letter in 1993 to the editor of the Chosen Few Digest, he states that he initiated the request for a bridge drop in a conversation with Colonel Puller at Coto Reed. Then he says that in a meeting, the bridge drop mission was rejected as too dangerous by the 314th Troop Carrier Group commander. It was considered dangerous, as I mentioned, Susan and I talked about this already, not due to the weight of the bridge spans, but due to the issues about being able to control the aircraft at such a low altitude of 800 to 1,000 feet above the ground. Control that aircraft when that 5,000 pounds suddenly came out of the back. The low altitude was required because the drop zone was only 300 yards. So the smaller the drop zone, the lower the pilot has to be to hit the drop zone. So Rowney says in his letter, he recalls that a courageous pilot steps forward saying the mission could be successful, and he volunteers to prove it. Now, we already know the outcome. Rowney states that he felt like the pilot who volunteered was the real hero of the operation, and that someone that the Chosen Few must know who this man was. Now, this was 1993 that he wrote that letter. And I might be going back to the Chosen Few and seeing if anybody responded to that challenge in 1993, saying they knew who that pilot was. Now, could it have been my dad? I'm going to say that I think it could well have been my dad. Dad was at Yanpo in that time frame, as I'll discuss a little bit later. And the 314th Troop Carrier Group commander, that was Dad's immediate boss. Dad became the mission commander of the 8 planes that dropped the Treadway bridge spans. The lore in the family was that Dad volunteered, for this, dangerous mission. I talked to my brother about whether he thinks General Rowney saying that this pilot stepped forward could have been my dad and our dad. And my
Mhm.
brother said, "Well, Sandy, you know that our dad wouldn't have sent his men, his squadron men, out on a mission that was considered too dangerous without proving that it could be done himself."
That's right.
So I think it's quite possible that that man that stepped forward and said to his boss, "No, I think this can be done, and I want to prove that it can be done," was probably my dad. I suspect I'll never really know the answer for sure, though.
But you know how amazing, Sandy, that you found these pieces like this article that was written by General Roney, kind of sharing what happened in this meeting about as they were planning whether this could be done or not. How you were able to find these pieces is really incredible. And things have come your way where you've been able to piece together parts of not only this mission, but just the character of your father, you know, that he was a can-do, very positive thinking uh, person, as well as someone who was willing to do the hard work, for a worthy mission as this. And I just love that these things came to you where it has unfolded so many aspects of your father and who he was.
Yeah. Well, he was a quite experienced pilot by that time, having been
Mhm.
flying since 41 and, flying through D-Day in Normandy in World War II and flying all missions in the Battle of the Bulge and all of that. So he was a pretty experienced pilot and I think an adventuresome kind of guy, probably. So, I have made many other connections on this journey of trying to figure out what my dad did in the Korean War. And one of the most important connections I've made is with Susan Key. We're sitting here talking to Susan today. Susan is a Korean War historian who's dedicated her life to honoring those that fought in the Korean War and keeping their stories alive for our current generation and future generations. She was born in Korea and she immigrated to the United States quite at a young age with her parents. And she has this great Facebook page called Honoring Korean War Veterans, which offers a lot of interesting stories on everything from specific men to units to battles to the machines they used, and even some human interest stories. Like one of my favorite is how Bob Hope ended up getting to the North Korean peninsula before hardly any of the troops got there. Now, Susan's also involved in the MIA community. So the connection I made with Susan was one day I was searching on the internet looking for some of those keywords that I've mentioned before, and I came to Susan's post about the Chosin breakout. And I left her a message on on her Facebook page about how my dad's squadron dropped those bridge spans. And I got an practically immediate response from her. And over the next few months, we collaborated on a story which she then published in 2019 on the December 7th anniversary date of the bridge drop. And so this is the Facebook post here that's shown. It was quite a lengthy post. Susan ended up asking me if I would write it. I was a little shocked by that, but I took a try at writing that. It was way too long, and I told her, you need to take your red pen to this and get rid of a lot of this. To my surprise, she didn't do that, and she added some to it. So it's quite a long post, but it got lots of attention, got lots of views, lots of comments. And I think she's posted it another time since then. So that was a really fun time for me to read people's comments and see the interest in the story.
Well, you know, Sandy, first of all, I want to thank you for that great commercial ad for my Facebook page. I don't think anyone could have done it better. I really appreciate the fact that this Facebook page has given me connections to people out there who are related to the stories that I am posting. And it shocks me every time. I'll post about a Medal of Honor hero from Korean War, and a son or daughter from that family will post a comment saying, "Oh, that's my dad." I'm like, "Oh my gosh." So every time I get a comment like that from somebody who's related to the story, gets an immediate response from me because it is such an honor, first of all, to connect with the descendants or family members of these heroes and to hear from the family firsthand what were these heroes like? Is there more of their story that we can share? And so, of course, when Sandy posted a comment that that's her father, now I didn't have this picture of her father in the cockpit and on the outside this airstrip here when I first posted it. It was just pictures of the blown out pass that you see, and then, planes. I had no idea who had dropped it. Uh, and then when she shared her father's story, then I was able to add these pictures. And then Sandy, of course, wrote that beautiful narrative of how she came to learn that was her father commanding the squadron of planes that dropped the bridge. So it really makes history come alive. And I think it's also a great opportunity for people to see from Sandy's example of how a family member can discover and research and find out for themselves information that their father may not even have shared. So, I'm just so thrilled when things like this happen. And I think, Sandy, you're one of the best examples of a family member who's really done excellent research to become really knowledgeable, not only for your family to know, but for people to learn from. So I so appreciate your dedication and devotion to that, to preserving legacies of heroes like your father.
And I so appreciate the connection with Susan Key.
Well, the honor is all mine, Sandy. I mean, your father is an incredible hero, and what an honor for me to know you and to learn about your father through him. And I just can't even I don't even have words to describe how honored I feel. So thank you, Sandy. It is just really a blessing to know you, and we've become really good friends as well.
Yeah. Okay, so another connection that I made out of searching for Dad's story was with the Air Mobility Command Museum, which is located in Dover, Delaware. It's adjacent to the Dover Air Force Base there. And this museum highlights the airlift aircraft and the airlift mission of the Air Mobility Command. And again, while searching on the internet, I found this article up here about how this museum had found this old C-119 that had flown in the Korean War. But guess what? It wasn't just any C-119. It was one of the 8 that flew on that Treadway Bridge mission. And so because of that historical context, they wanted to save that plane, and they had that plane disassembled and trucked and flown, parts of it trucked and parts of it flown to Dover, where it was lovingly restored over a few years. And this is what the plane looks like now as it sits on the tarmac there. And if this overhead shot here, this is the little plane here, right here. Now this is good old number 352, which I hope to point out in a future slide here. This is a fun museum to go to if you like airplanes. They have an open cockpit day, I think once a month, where you can actually get on the planes. They have a hangar back here. It has a C-47 in it. So for the first time, I got to step into a C-47, which my dad flew in World War II.
Sandy, can I ask you
So
a quick question right here? You pointed
sure.
out to the one of the 8 planes that's there right in the front. Can you point to that again on the
This
ground
is
there?
the 352 as it was restored, and this is
Yeah.
what it looks like from the overhead shot here.
Yeah. So when you look at the overhead shot, it actually looks a lot smaller than some of the other planes there. I'm really shocked that it wasn't one of the larger cargo planes we see on the ground there.
Right. Yeah, I'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay, that's great.
So they held a dedication
Hmm.
well, actually in July, because of Susan, I was able to go on a kind of a VIP tour there. They just treated me very well. I was with my husband, my brother, and my nephew, who is my dad's grandson. We went out to Dover and had a tour and got to look at the C-119. Now, I'm going to say here that my nephew, dad's grandson, my dad would have been so proud to have lived long enough to know that his grandson graduated from the Air Force Academy, got his PhD, and is now a colonel in the U.S. Space Force. Wouldn't that have been something for him to know?
Oh yeah. Yeah, and nobody even knew Space Force would come into existence either, right?
Exactly.
That's
So
great.
the dedication for this plane was held in October of 2022, and my husband and I decided to go back to Dover for the dedication. And to our surprise, my nephew had been invited to speak at the dedication.
That's awesome.
So I'll also say that, the Air Mobility Command Museum does this Hangar Digest magazine, and it's kind of like the Chosen Few magazine. They do like a quarterly publication. And so in the fall of 2022, they did this particular publication, and more than half of that Hangar Digest is about this mission, the treadway bridge drop, the planes, the men, and so forth that were on this mission. So if people are interested in reading some quite detailed articles about this bridge drop mission, this magazine is available online, and I think Susan is going to put a link to that at the end of the YouTube video, I
Yeah,
believe.
actually, I'll put it in the description box so that way people can copy it and then use that to search and get to that website.
Great. I appreciate that.
Hmm.
All right. So here's another very cool connection, and this is a recent connection. This is Lieutenant Colonel William Blanton. He was a C-119 pilot. And this is a picture I got him to send me. If you look at this hat, you can't quite see it, but it says flying boxcar, and it's the emblem of a flying boxcar there. And in the back, I don't know if you can see that, but in the back, he's got his computer screen up, and there's 3 flying boxcars behind him in this picture. Now, Mr. Blanton is a longtime member of the Chosen Few. He actually sent me information that showed that he joined the first year of the Chosen Few organization. He asked me when I talked to him to call him Bones, so you'll hear me say Bones sometimes. So I just want to let you know that I got his permission to do that. It was a little uncomfortable at first, but I got used to it. He said all of his military career he was called Bones from, above and below ranks around him.
And that's
So
because he was skinny.
it was because he was skinny, yes. So I saw a submission that he sent to the Chosen Few News Digest again, and he mentioned that he was in the 61st Troop Carrier Squadron at Ashia. Now that's a sister squadron to Dad's 62nd. And he also mentioned my dad by name in this letter he wrote to the editor. So I was able to locate him, and we have been carrying on this great conversation through email and phone calls since June of this year. He's the author of a book called Mill Hill Pilot, in which he talks about his Air Force career, and he had quite an interesting career. Now, that book is not in publication anymore, but I was able to find it on the secondary market, and if one is interested, they can maybe find one on the secondary market. Now, Mr. Blanton turned 100 years old just a couple of weeks ago. And he and I both think that his experiences were very similar to my dad's. And so what he tells me about the missions and the planes and so forth would probably be what my dad would have told me. I think Dad, being a squadron commander, probably had more paperwork to do, though. So I have asked Bones lots and lots of questions. He's been really a font of information. He's written me detailed, both text messages and detailed emails, which I've kept all of them. It's really difficult to believe that someone of 100 years old has got the memory that he has, and he doesn't really look things up. He just rattles them off. And then he may go look it up, and sure enough, what he said was what, his document said. Also, he told me one time that he thought anything he put his name on, he should keep a copy of. So he's got copious records. And I thought it might be fun to learn a little bit about these C-119s and their missions. So I wanted to relate some of the questions that I asked Bones and some of the answers that he gave me. So I said, Bones, what about the 314th Troop Carrier Group formation? He said it was located first in Smyrna, Tennessee. It was Smyrna Army Airfield, which soon became Seward Air Force Base. This photo is taken at Seward, and there's a brand new, spanking clean, shiny C-119 in the foreground. Now, Susan, this plane, I think, was a big plane back in 1949, but I tell you what, when you're standing and looking at one, it is really not that big of a plane.
Uh-huh.
He says in 1949 and 1950, they were training on these new C-119s, and they were really the Air Force's first tactical airlifter. So they were designed to be able to supply from the air, as opposed to the C-47 that my dad flew in World War II. Now, they dropped a lot of things too from the air. They had something called para containers that would be carried under the wing, but they also would drop them from the fuselage. But you know what? The C-47 only has two man doors. And so everything that came out of a C-47 had to be kicked out of a man-sized door. So that was, I think, a difficult task. Now, Bones went on to say that there were originally three squadrons of 16 planes each. But when South Korea was invaded in June of 1950, they quickly beefed up this group to four squadrons of 25 planes each. And that resulted in 100 planes and crew that were then deployed to Ashia, Japan in August of 1950. And these aircraft, as I said, were based in Ashia Air Base for the duration of the war. Now, I said, again, those small planes, I'm thinking, back in 1950, flying those rather small planes all that way. I said, Bones, how did you get those planes over from Tennessee to Japan? So Bones said he went in a flight of four. He was the lead plane, and he had the only navigator on his plane. Now, Bones was a navigator himself before he became a pilot, and this map was created by Bones. And I highlighted in red the route that he told me they took. So he said they went from Tennessee to California, California to Hickam Air Force Base, and then on to Johnston Atoll, and from Johnston Atoll to Kwajalein here, then to Guam, and finally to Japan. And he said all of the planes and the crews arrived in early September of 1950. Well, all except Bones, anyway. Bones' plane had to, their whole flight of four, Bones had a problem with his plane at Hawaii. They had to turn back, spend a couple of days, extra days in Hawaii to get that engine fixed. Then between Johnston and Atoll and Kwajalein, they got about halfway there. It was like 900 miles. They got almost halfway there, and Bones had another problem with that same plane and the engine. He had to shut that engine down. And because it was nightfall was coming on, and Bones had the only navigator in his plane, they all decided to turn around and go back to Johnston Atoll. And Bones ended up staying there 12 days this time in order to be with the plane as it was repaired. The other three men went on to Japan. I guess Bones had to go the rest of the way by himself. Now, one master sergeant described these planes as noisy and slow and said that described it as several thousand rivets held together by noise.
That's a great description. I don't know what it would sound like, but it sounds like, yeah, it was just very noisy. And
Bones didn't think that. He thought it was a great plane. And he also said he had these two problems with his plane on the way over and never had another problem, in the combat zone.
Mhm.
So that was great. He flew the same plane the whole time he was there.
I think we forget that so much technology has happened where aircrafts are so much better now. But
Right.
these guys who flew in World War II and Korea, flew these things were just so, I think, probably not the easiest things to fly, and
Yeah.
probably not the most comfortable either. So,
Right. For
yeah.
sure not. And, navigating by the stars and things like that, dead reckoning, stuff like that. Okay, so I had always been curious about the clamshell doors on these C-119s. And this picture is of, now see that number there? That's good old 352. This is the plane that is at Dover now. this picture was taken out of the plane my dad was in during the bridge drop mission. But I liked it because it has the 352 there. Now here the clamshell doors are off, and so you can see at the back of this fuselage, you just see kind of an empty square. That's the interior of the plane's cargo area. And you know, if the clamshell doors are on, they're hinge doors and they would come together like this in the back. And then when they're on the ground, they would open them up and they could load them with things like a forklift. And so I asked Bones, did you fly with those clamshell doors off or on? And he said, usually with them off, because it simply took too much time to put them on and take them off and put them back on, and they really didn't have much extra time. I said, well, what altitude did you fly from Ashia, Japan to the chosen drop zones? And he said they would fly at about 9,000 feet until they got to the drop zone. And then they would drop down to 800 to 1,200 feet, depending on the type of drop zone it was. He said it was very important, as most of the drop zones were in the mountains. It was very important for him to keep one eye on the mountainside and one eye on his altimeter. He also, in his book, wrote that flying over the chosen area, he said there were jillions, that's the word he used, jillions of foxholes. And also, he said from their height of 1,000 feet or so, it was near impossible to tell whether the troops below were Chinese or were friendly troops. I asked him how long the flight took from Ashia to the drop zone and back, the drop zone at Chosin, and he says about a 5.5 hour round trip day for them. I found it surprising that they were flying so often with these cargo doors off because of the extreme cold of that winter. And Bones said that at one time he was flying at about 4,000 feet. He looked at his onboard thermometer and it read minus 42 degrees.
Wow.
So again, this was the first airlift plane that was designed strictly for, or mostly for, dropping supplies from the air. So I wanted to understand how it worked. Bones, you know, had flight manuals from those planes, so he had a lot of information. But they were built with a belly hatch and a monorail system across the top of the airplane. And it was designed so that they could convey these bundled packages at a rapid pace and drop them forward through that belly hatch. There was a static line attached to the monorail that would pull the ripcord as they went through the hatch. And they were designed so that 20 500-pound bundles could be dropped through the belly hatch in 8 to 10 seconds.
Wow.
So they dropped, you know, way up at the Chosin, Udamni and Hagaruri and so forth. They dropped everything basically that they needed up there: ammunition, weapons, food, medical supplies, clothing, and yes, they dropped Tootsie Rolls. So many people know the Tootsie Roll story, but if you don't, just real quickly, Tootsie Roll was the name of a code name of an artillery shell. And so one of the units, or maybe more than one, needed some Tootsie Roll artillery shells, and they called back for those. And nobody knows quite what happened, but there was miscommunication, and whoever took that message thought they really wanted the candy. And so they loaded up the planes with Tootsie Roll, the candy, and they dropped those. I'm sure the men were not too happy not to get the artillery shells, but they were happy to have the candy, it turns out, because one, it was quick energy for them. It's something they could put in their mouth and it would warm and they could eat it easily. And also they found out that it could be used for patching up holes in all sorts of things, like gasoline tanks and hoses on vehicles. They use those Tootsie Rolls, they chew them up and then stick them on there, and then they freeze on there, and they patched a lot of holes that way. And so I asked Bones, you know, about this Tootsie Roll drop and what was thought back at Ashia about that event. And he said, well, it was kind of an embarrassing snafu related to miscommunication. And then he said, they found out only later that the Tootsie Rolls were really a gift from heaven. However, they also had all sorts of other equipment that would not fit through the belly hatch. So they often dropped things like gasoline. There you wonder about parachuting gasoline to the ground. Artillery pieces, jeeps, and so forth would be dropped out of the back of the planes, obviously with those clamshell doors off. They would just push them out at the drop zone. The pilot would nose the plane up a little bit and they would kind of roll out the back. And that plane could haul as many as 64 paratroopers in their gear, and they would haul paratroopers with the clamshell doors on, and the clamshell doors had two integral man doors there, and so they could exit on the back of both sides of the plane. All right, and I want to give a shout out here to the Combat Cargo Wing's contribution to the Chosin breakout. So in the 2-week period of the Chosin breakout, there was 300 and, well, I must say the Combat Cargo Wing was C-119s, of which there were 100, give or take, and C-47s, and then I think there were a couple of squadrons of C-46s, so that would have been the Combat Cargo Wing. And in the 2-week period of the battle and the breakout, there were 350 flights, averaging 29 flights a day. Of course, that was weather dependent, and many of those days, they couldn't fly because of blizzards and low visibility and so forth. They dropped 1,580 tons of supply and equipment, which averages 132 tons per day. They evacuated around 5,000 wounded and sick troops, averaging 400 a day. Now, many of those were done between December 1 and December 6th of the breakout, and those were done by C-47s that landed at an airstrip at Hagaruri, an airstrip that General Smith insisted to be built because he anticipated this problem of having severely wounded men that needed to be carried out. And again, his engineers worked 10 days straight, 24 hours a day, being shot at, worked through the night with lights on them, still being shot at, to use bulldozers in frozen ground to try to make this landing strip. And it took them 10 days. They were successful. And then, like I say, thousands of men were evacuated off of that airstrip using the C-47s. Also, after the breakout, I guess the Air Force decided that they wanted that Yanpo airfield down near Hungnam also to be evacuated. So between the 14th and the 17th of December, they evacuated Yanpo airfield, hauling out 20,000 tons of cargo, 3,900 men, and 228 patients that were in their little medical facility there, using all available aircraft, taking off in 5-minute intervals day and night. So for the actions during the Chosin battle, the 314th Troop Carrier Group and 2 other squadrons were awarded the Presidential Distinguished Unit Citation, which was the first such award to the Air Force in the Korean War.
I love this, Sandy. This great summary of really the role that the Air Force played, a critical role they played in supplying the troops on the ground during the Battle of Chosin and also getting the wounded out. And, we don't think about the evacuation of the actual Yampo airfield and all of their supplies and equipment and personnel. So I really appreciate you having done that research to highlight to us that they also had to evacuate that airfield.
Yeah, and of course there was a great evacuation that took place around Hungnam with all the equipment and the men, lots of men, many more than 15,000, that were in the arena, and all their equipment. And then they blew up anything that they thought the Chinese could use. So, that was quite an operation by the Navy as well.
Mm-hmm. I have a question here, Sandy. Do you know what happened to that airfield? Do you know if we left it intact or whether that was blown up? I don't know much about the Yampo airfield. Just wondering if you came across anything.
I don't know. I'm not sure they tried to actually blow holes in the in the airfields themselves. I looked at it once, and It was still in existence recently, but it was being used, as I recall, to hydroponically grow food
Oh, really? That's
in that
interesting.
area.
Okay.
So at that base.
Wow.
Okay, so this slide kind of brings me full circle, or really almost full circle. So I want to reflect for a minute on this Legion of Merit certificate that was the starting point of my journey. All the information that I had gathered, from the start until recently made me think that my dad got this Legion of Merit medal because of the bridge drop mission. But, sometimes, what they say about assumptions, right, Susan?
Mhm.
Sometimes assumptions aren't correct. And it turned out that my assumption was wrong here. So I requested my dad's military records at the suggestion of Susan Key. Now, I hadn't requested them in the past because my dad had told me in the 70s that his military records were destroyed in the fire that they had at the St. Louis facility, the National Archive facility there. He said his records were destroyed. So I hadn't asked for records, but Susan urged me to do that. And she suggested I do that through my South Carolina senator. So I did do that at the height of the pandemic. And it took about 18 months, but I got a CD back. Unfortunately, most of the information was medical. And I feel like Dad's medical records must have been out at the time of the fire. But also, three things that were in there were the actual citations, what his commanders wrote for the three medals that he was awarded in a 6-month period from September through December of 1950. He was awarded the Bronze Star, the Distinguished Flying Cross, and this Legion of Merit. So when I got that piece of paper and read it, of course, I was looking for the bridge, and word of the bridge being dropped is why he got that Legion of Merit. And actually, the word bridge does not appear in that citation. So I'm going to read you just a little bit of that citation, the beginning part, because his commander wrote this and he probably can say it better than I can anyway. Lieutenant Colonel Royal S. Thompson distinguished himself by exceptionally meritorious conduct in the performance of outstanding service to his country during the period of 28 November to 10 December 1956 or 1950. During this extremely critical period, Colonel Thompson was in command of combat cargo operations at Yonpo Airfield, Korea. In this position of great responsibility, he exercised complete operational control over aerial drop missions and air evacuation missions in the hazardous Chosin Reservoir area. He immediately consolidated the many participating units into one centrally controlled organization. This ensured the utilization of every available means of airlift support to assist the United States Marines and the United States Army troops in escaping from the powerful trap composed of 70,000 enemy soldiers. So it goes on from there, but again, the word bridge is not in there. So, as I was putting this presentation together, Susan, I never had really stopped to think about where I started and where I was, now. It's just something that was built a little bit upon a little bit. But as I put it together and I had to, basically reflect where I started and where I am now, I realized that if I just held on to these, kind of meager few items that it was passed down to me and left them in a box on the top of my closet shelf, what I would have missed.
Mhm.
I have learned a lot about my dad's World War II involvement, and I knew nothing of the Korean War, and now I've been reading quite a bit, and I kind of know much more about that. I would have known nothing about the Battle of Chosin. I would have known nothing about the Treadway Bridge drop. So, look what opened up to me once I took the initiative to do this research, including being at the reunion in October of 2025 and giving this presentation to the chosen few veterans and their families. So I'd say if you're interested in what, one of your family members did in any war, but the Korean War, we're talking here, kind of start searching. It's probably worth your time and effort. If you're a military member, I hope you can take some photos or digital photos and label them. Make sure you label those things. Put down your assignments, what you did and where you did it. I really feel like sometime in the future, one of your descendants will be interested in what you did in your military career. So anyway, Susan, I hope this has been interesting, educational, maybe inspirational, and I'll turn that back over to you now.
Well, it was all of it. And what a tremendous honor for us to not only just learn about this great hero, but to kind of go on this journey with you of how everything started to piece together, and even your new friendship now with Mr. William Bones Blanton,
Yeah,
which is a great gift in itself to him and to you to
right.
meet each other now, 75 years on. There's so much I want to say here, but I think I want to highlight this Legion of Merit citation you just read. I think we spoke at first a lot about your dad dropping this bridge and seeing his face on this documentary of Chosin and seeing, wow, he did this wonderful, amazing mission of dropping the bridge. But he did far more than that. And as that citation spoke to, he managed the operations of that entire Yampo airfield, which was located in North Korea, and such an important role of providing air support and supplies to the guys on the ground. Marines, Army, British Royal Marines were there as well. Just everybody on the ground depended on everything coming in from Yampo Airfield. So this was truly a great lifeline that your father was responsible for those guys that were fighting. And I think even before that, I also want to mention something that I know you had mentioned and learned also from Mr. Blanton, that your dad and also Mr. Blanton, correct me if I'm wrong, they also were responsible for later on after the Chosin in dropping paratroopers
Yeah,
in March of 1951.
correct.
But there was also another paratrooper drop in October 1950. And I believe they were part of that as well. So it
Right,
wasn't just the supporting of Battle of Chosin, but throughout the entire time they were there,
right.
they were critical to accomplishing these missions of dropping paratroopers, evacuating the wounded, and getting critical supplies to the guys on the ground. Without the air support, the guys on the ground could not have fought on the ground against such a great enemy. So I am so grateful to men like your father and Mr. Blanton. Let's take a minute here to recognize Mr. Blanton. Mr. Blanton, you and I have only spoken on the phone, but I just want to take a minute here to thank you with all my heart as a descendant of those you helped save. My parents were saved during the war. And this is the same message that would go to your father as well, Sandy, that I would not be here without the heroic and the great courage of men like uh, uh, Colonel Royal Thompson and you, Mr. Blanton, and so many countless others we don't even know about today that were there to serve their country and to help save the men on the ground and to help save South Korea from communism. There are no words that I can put together that would ever be adequate, but I hope you can feel my heart of gratitude, Mr. Blanton, for all that you did. And I hope you are so immensely proud. And I am so grateful for the knowledge you have shared with me and with Sandy and helping us to learn so that we can also help preserve your legacy and the legacy of men who served in the U.S. Air Force. So it is a tremendous gift for us, for Sandy and I, to have come to know you, Mr. Blanton. And I thank Sandy for that because Sandy's the one who reached out to him. So it is truly an incredible honor. And I am humbled every day as I think about heroes like you, Mr. Blanton, and also Colonel Thompson, who I never got the opportunity to thank in person. So I just thank you, Sandy, with all my heart for your father and what everything he had done. And there's thousands he helped save during the war. And really, truly, there are no words to match, to even come close to what he did in service. I guess the last thing I would like to say is how I am amazed over and over how humble our Korean War heroes are. And this isn't just words I'm giving you, it is truly something I have learned as true. I've interviewed over 200 Korean War veterans. And now, you have unfolded your father's story. And you said that his Legion of Merit was in a manila envelope. I cannot imagine. This wasn't something he even framed and put up on the wall.
Right.
It's something he just happened to find in an envelope. One time I interviewed a veteran. He was First Marine Division. He made the Incheon landing and fought at the Battle of Chosin, and he was awarded the Bronze Star. And when I went to interview him, I asked him, "Where's your Bronze Star?" And he goes to the garage and gets a shoebox, and he dusts it off and say, "Oh, here it is." And I said, "Mr. Graham, how could you put a Bronze Star in a shoebox in the garage?" And he said, "Well, I know what I've done." I said, "Well, you should be proud of it." And he was satisfied with knowing what he did, and that was enough for him. And I have a feeling that your father was one of those men because he never told you about these amazing missions that he was part of, the fact that he was part of combat operations, cargo operations at Yampo, and the paratrooper drops during the Korean War, and of course Normandy. So many things that he has done. But I think I am even also grateful, more even grateful to you, Sandy, because they're humble, we wouldn't have known their story. And it's not in them to tell their own story.
Right.
So it took people like you and other family members of veterans to uncover their story to share with us. And so I so appreciate, Sandy, just your tenacity, your devotion, and just your curiosity to learn. And I know that Mr. Blanton probably would say the same thing about you, that you've had these amazing conversations with him, asking him questions about just how things function on a cargo plane, what's involved in flying with these really heavy equipment and pushing them out the clamshell door. I didn't even know what a clamshell door was until you told me. So there's so many things that you've helped me learn as well. So I cannot thank you enough, Sandy, for being such a great example of someone who, out of curiosity and out of interest in learning, have uncovered such a treasure for us. And so I also encourage all the family members and children of Korean War veterans and any veterans out there of any war to start to do what you can to find out what your father or your grandfather or your uncle did during the war, because that is part of your family history and something that we all can learn from and appreciate what they did to make our today possible. And in the case of Colonel Thompson, I can't even imagine how many Marines and soldiers he helped save, and also the refugees out of the Hungnam area, and throughout the war, and all the things that he had helped drop the supplies for. So really, I have no words for your father other than he is an incredible hero. I just keep saying that over and over. And also, one other thing I want to mention, Sandy had alluded to, is that if you are looking for military records, you can request from your U.S. Senator from your state to help you get the military records of your father or grandfather or uncle. So all you have to do is just pick one of your senators from your state and ask them to help you get that. And, tell them that, you want to help preserve their story. You want to know what they did during the war. And it is part of your family story that you would like to preserve. And they will help you with that. I know a veteran, Mr. Kesner here, who was an artillery officer during the Korean War, is the one who really helped me understand that you can do this. He told me, "Susan, I was told that my records were burned in the fire at St. Louis Military Records Archive." But he said he contacted one of our Arizona senators. And 2 weeks later, he called me and said, "Susan, I got an envelope 2 inches thick." He said, "Come
Wow.
on over." I'm like, "Okay, I'll come over." So I went over, and it had a lot of military, like medical records, like you also said, Sandy. All the physical tests that he did during the war. But he said it had everything in there, and he had only served in the military 3 years, and yet there was all this records. So you
Wow.
just never know. I would say don't take no for an answer if they tell you the records were burned. Try another method. And I know Sandy also researched a lot of articles and magazines about the topic of cargo planes, and that's unearthed a whole bunch of different things that she would not have otherwise learned. So do what you can to learn and share that story with others. And it is a important legacy we need to preserve for future generations. So, Sandy, I know I talked a lot here, as I always do. Is there any last thoughts you would like to share about just anything you've learned or anything you'd like to share with this audience?
Well, it's been a long journey, I guess, since the 1990s when I started looking into it. And, it wasn't like a full-time job or anything. I had a full-time job, and so I kind of did it in my spare time here and there. So it could have probably been uncovered faster, but I feel like, I just kind of made a little bit of steady progress here and there. And like I say, really have found things that I never dreamed that I would find out. So it's brought my dad's military career to the forefront, and I really, appreciate him more and more. I wish that I had asked him these questions when he was alive, but we never know, right? How much time one has. And Mr. Blanton has kind of filled that gap for me a little bit because I feel like it's almost, I think that the questions I ask him are probably the answers he gives are probably the answers my dad would have given. So that's been really special too. So I
Hmm.
treasure that that relationship that I have with him.
Absolutely. I mean, the fact that he's 100 and he's still with us and
Yeah,
able to recall just exact details of things and be able to
exactly.
communicate that to you is a tremendous gift. And so I hope you're documenting and keeping everything he's telling you, Sandy.
I
I think,
am.
I know at the beginning you said that you're not a historian. I think you have fastly become one. Uh, as it relates to Korean War and all the combat cargo operations of the Korean War, you are quickly becoming an expert, Sandy. I've learned so much from you today. And I thank you over and over for sharing your father's story. And of course, all of our thanks goes to our Korean War heroes like your father, all of our Korean War veterans who are still with us today. God bless you all. And thank you so much for listening.